In life, we have no true heroes or villains. The problem is, when we interact on the internet, it's natural for us to want to frame things in terms of a narrative where we can decide who the good guys and who the bad guys are in certain situations, especially when it comes to commentating on a conflict or a terrible crime or something that happens online. But what happens when no one in a situation is truly good or bad? What happens when everyone in a situation may be terrible beyond redemption? On this channel, we talk a lot about literature, and often in literature and in stories, we want to find who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, who we can root for. And if it's a work of fiction, we might even find a main character that we can identify with as a sort of anti-hero, even if that person is flawed and has a skewed moral compass. We might follow them on their arc, knowing that the story isn't real and doesn't necessarily have a true impact on society. With the ways that drama and conflict and controversies unfold online, we often seem to have this inclination to do something very similar, treating the internet and the things that happen on it as a fictional story where we can put ourselves as the audience with a certain level of distance from the people who it's actually affecting. But the truth is, many of us do that only for our own comfort, because the people we interact with online and the people who share their lives on social media and on YouTube and on other sites like that are doing so not as a fictional character, but as a real person. And when we look at situations, when we look at a conflict between two creators or a conflict between a creator and their audience, we often want to identify who's the one who's right, who's problematic, who's toxic, who's morally the correct one here. When we're online and the lines of what is real and what is fake are so blurred, it becomes impossible to ever truly deem who is morally acceptable and who isn't. Nowhere has this been clearer than over the past nearly 15 years of documenting the story of Christine Weston Chandler, or Chris Chan, on the internet.
Christine Weston Chandler, more commonly known on the internet as Chris Chan, is the victim of what is quite possibly the longest running and most obsessive internet trolling saga of all time.
Goddamn miserable, worthless cretins! See, trolls best leave us alone.
When I first announced that I was interested in making a video on Chris Chan, even my comment section immediately jumped to trying to identify who the heroes, who the villains, who the victims were in this story, when in reality, everyone in this story is a victim and a villain in a different way. Half of my comments said things like, "Why continue to cover the ongoing abuse of an autistic trans woman? She suffered enough." While other comments said, "How could anyone defend a monster like Chris who has committed so many horrible acts of assault and predation upon women?" On the internet, where black and white thinking is encouraged, it's often difficult to realize that both of these things can be true simultaneously. And as much as we want to, it's impossible to assign motives to other people online, because we're not all characters in a fictional story. We're not all pieces of literature. We're all real people who have good and evil inside of all of us. Today's video is going to be a little bit more of a serious one, but I think it's one that really needs to be talked about. There are so many angles to discuss here, and there are so many things that mainstream media sources are completely neglecting to talk about. So we're going to go back to the very beginning. We're going to discuss everything. We're going to talk about different angles, from the ways that early internet culture affected and damaged a lot of the millennial generation, to the ways that this situation has affected, for better or worse, the discourse surrounding neurodivergences like autism, as well as the LGBT. If you're someone who's new to this story and doesn't have any background, don't worry, I'm going to be giving an overview of the whole thing, and I'm going to explain why I really do feel like I need to talk about this issue on my channel, even though some people have cautioned me against it. So let's get into it. This is Chris Chan.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
Hey, what's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, welcome for the first time. Please don't forget to subscribe. Every Monday and Friday, I put out new videos about books and business, as well as commentary about the LGBT community. If we want a little bit of humor before we get into the difficult stuff of today, check out my new nails. I now officially have straight passing privilege. Before I go to the gay bar this weekend, maybe I'll just pop this one off and then we'll be good to go again. If you enjoy some of the more controversial and in-depth topics that I cover on this channel, I also want to let you guys know that you might want to subscribe to my second channel, which is called Your Morning Guru. That channel is a morning show live stream and podcast where my friend and I study different internet figures, specifically gurus like business gurus, health and wellness gurus, and people like that. Try to live their lives, see what we can learn from them, and on that show, we're really about engaging with ideas that we disagree with. Our whole mission is being anti-echo chamber and pro-curious. I believe in next week we're going to be covering atheism, and then we're going to go into Ben Shapiro. So we're doing a lot of more in-depth and controversial weeks, but we decided that covering Chris Chan on that show might even be a little bit too much, so I just decided to do it as one video on this channel. Definitely check out that channel if you're interested in the types of content that I make as videos on here. So I need to frame a couple things before we get into the main content of this video. First, couple warnings. This video is going to cover some really heavy topics. I am trying to not get it demonetized, so I'm going to try to say the things that we're going to cover in a censored way. So we are going to cover what people on the internet are now calling SA. That's a big topic of what we're going to talk about today. SA is when you do something to someone physically without their consent. I think we all know what that is. Beyond that, it's also going to be covering heavily the topic of, we're going to take the word nicest, see the word nicest on the screen, and then we're going to flip the first two letters in the word nicest. Now we see what that word is. I'm not going to flip them on the screen because I don't want to get demonetized. But if we flip the first two letters in nicest, what do we get? It's the thing where the SA happens between two people who are related to each other in the same family. We're going to be talking about that as well. We're also going to be discussing a lot of cases of abuse. We're going to be talking about mental illness. We're going to be talking about abuse of people with mental illness, and we're going to be just a lot of stuff. Transphobia, racism, homophobia. This video is heavy, y'all, so if you don't want to watch this one, I totally understand, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, I also need to frame really quick how I'm going to be referring to Chris in this video, and I'm going to be referring to Chris as she. And this has actually been a little bit of a controversial statement. A few people, when I've talked about this on my community tab, have been saying, don't call Chris she. Some people have been saying, do call Chris she, and if you don't call Chris she, you're transphobic. And then I've had other people say, if you do call Chris she, then you're either transphobic or misogynistic or some combination. Guys, I'm going to explain real quick why I'm going to refer to Chris as she, and if you don't have any background on this, I'm going to give the whole summary in just a minute. So, Christine Weston Chandler, or Chris Chan, identifies as a transgender woman, specifically a transgender lesbian, and about a decade ago, she changed her name to Christine, still goes by Chris as a nickname, and did when she was presenting male as well. Now, there has been a big controversy about this because there have been some things that have indicated that Chris was only becoming trans or saying that she was trans because she wanted to date lesbians, especially since Chris has said that she is not interested in dating other trans women. She will only date cisgender women because she really hates penises as a concept and things like that, which, like, is understandable. Be attracted to whatever genitalia you want. However, Chris has shown a lot of homophobia and transphobia and things like that throughout her life, as well as having shown a lot of tendencies for preying on women throughout her life. That, and Chris has even said things online that have indicated that. However, Chris has also said a lot of things that have indicated from the beginning that she has had this kind of gender dysphoria. In preparation for this video, I watched a lot of the documentary that a YouTuber named Gino Samuel has put up, which covered, it's like 59 parts, which are all almost an hour long, and I watched at least like 40 parts of it that cover Chris Chan's life, and you can even see towards the beginning that Chris pretty much from the beginning was always like envious of wanting to have her own breasts and wanting to wear a bra and enjoyed dressing in women's clothing even when she was presenting and identifying male. So there were some times that you could see that maybe that maybe her being trans was legitimate. However, none of that is relevant. The reason I'm going to be calling Chris she is that I think doesn't make a lot of sense to make a practice out of trying to determine what somebody else's gender is. It's generally good to just take someone at their word when they tell you, because none of us can read anybody else's minds. And if we're out here trying to spend time, first of all, I'm going to try to make this as short of a section of this video as possible, because whether Chris is trans or not is such a small piece of this puzzle. Like, it's not even the tip of the iceberg, and it's one of the only things that the mainstream media is focusing on, and it's another reason I want to talk about it. But I do want to frame why I'm calling Chris she, so that people in the comments don't get upset at me for that. I actually really appreciate the way that ContraPoints, when she did the video Cringe, where she talked about Chris Chan a little bit, how she framed that section where she said, you know, is Chris really trans? I don't know, and I don't care.
Yes, I will be calling her by she, her pronouns, which I paused to explain because I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually take her transition seriously. Most people seem to regard it as simply another absurd symptom of her hilarious mental condition. In fact, a bunch of trans people will probably get real salty with me for making trans people look bad by including Chris Chan in our very prestigious and exclusive club. Is Chris Chan really trans? I don't know, and I don't care.
I don't think any of us are ever truly going to know what is going on inside of someone else's head, and if we're out here trying to debate whether we think based on our own standards whether Chris is really trans or not, that's going to set a precedent that other people can determine for someone else what their reality is. And I find that weird and upsetting. Like, I've always been a believer that no one knows your life and your experience better than you do, so that's one reason that Chris has said, my pronouns are she, her. I'm going to refer to her that way. The other argument I've seen with people saying, no, we should call Chris he, the other argument I've seen about that is people saying, well, Chris, because, as we're going to see, Chris has committed a terrible SA, and because of that, if we refer to Chris as she, that is showing Chris a sign of respect, and Chris doesn't deserve respect. Chris doesn't deserve humanity because Chris has committed this horrible, unspeakable crime. Whether or not someone is trans is irrelevant to whether they're a criminal or not. Those things are not related. The problem with saying, I'm going to call you the gender you don't identify as to show you an act of disrespect, is that, first of all, most of us don't know Chris personally. So if you're calling Chris the wrong pronoun, Chris isn't going to hear you. But who is going to hear you is maybe trans family members or friends. A thing I've seen a lot that was like this was back when Trump was president, right? And Trump was doing a lot of nasty stuff and hurting a lot of people. And a lot of people would make fun of Trump for being fat and say, like, Trump is a fat, lazy loser and all of these things like that. Well, Donald Trump isn't going to hear you call him fat, but your fat family members and friends are going to hear that you think that calling someone fat is an insult. They're going to hear that what you think about their body is that it is inferior, or that it is something worthy of being made fun of, or that it is a character flaw. Even if Chris is a horrible criminal, if you have trans family members and friends, you don't want them to think that your recognition of their gender is conditional. I just want to say I'm going to be calling Chris she because it's good to make a practice of just accepting what people tell you about themselves and not trying to equate in any way someone being trans and being a criminal. Those things are irrelevant. I've also heard some people say, well, Chris is a bad representation of the trans community or is making the trans community look bad. Every group of people is going to have some people who are good and some people who are bad. The bisexuals, we're stuck with Shane Dawson. Shane Dawson, who's like, I'm attracted to the two genders, humans and cats. Everybody is going to have somebody in their demographic or their community who is a shitty person or who is a person who's going to make their community look bad. And it's just really not fair to ever put the burden of being good representation for a marginalized group on one individual. That's absolutely ridiculous. We shouldn't be doing that. A lot of the discussion around whether Chris is trans is having to do with whether Chris is going to be going to a men's or a women's prison after what she did. So on July 31st, 2021, audio of a phone call came out. I'm not going to play it because it's highly disturbing and there are lots of videos where people play it. Audio came out where Chris discussed having had intimate relations with her own mother. Chris's mother is about 80 years old and is speculated to have been suffering with dementia for a while, so whether Chris's mom had the ability to consent or to say no or to fight back is very strongly under question. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this is that now that Chris has been arrested and is awaiting trial, this has hit mainstream news, and recently Tucker Carlson on Fox News actually commented on this, and I think his commentary did so much more harm than good for this situation. And I'm going to react to that clip real quick, and then after that we're going to dive into the history of what actually happened here and talk about how Tucker Carlson's analysis of the situation doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what the real issues here are.
A YouTube personality called Chris Chan has just been arrested in Virginia on, of all things, incest charges. Authorities say Chan was having sex with his 79-year-old mother who has dementia. Chris Chan is a biological man, but he identifies as a woman. Reportedly, Virginia authorities initially went along with that. They classified Chris Chan as a female, and that means Chris Chan, who is an accused sex criminal, would have been housed in a women's jail. We understand that decision has been reversed.
So, just as a quick thing right here, from what I've read about what's happening in Virginia, where Chris is arrested right now, is that because Chris has legally changed her gender to female and has legally changed her name to Christine, because of that, Chris was originally held in a women's jail in the county where she is. However, in order to go into state prison in Virginia, and anyone in the comments who is involved with law or who knows more about this, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but Chris would be put in prison because for prison in Virginia, to go into that gender of prison, you have to have had bottom surgery. You have to have the genitalia that identifies with that, if that makes sense. So if Chris had gotten bottom surgery or vaginoplasty or something, then Chris would be going into women's prison. But because Chris has not had those procedures, Chris will go into men's prison. Now, the ethics of that are definitely up for discussion. The ethics of gender segregation of anything, including prison, I think are up for discussion. I think the ethics of the concept of prison itself are up for discussion, but that is a whole can of worms that I'm not ready to open right now. So let's just continue with this clip.
Likely due to public pressure. It became public, unfortunately, for the state of Virginia, and Chan is now being considered a man by the jail. But this is not an isolated incident. Many prisons in this country do house biological men with women. This is something we predicted, many predicted, and were laughed at.
So this is the problem with this clip, is that Tucker Carlson has made this exclusively a trans issue, and we're going to talk about why this is so much of a bigger issue than this. Right now, Chris is being used as like a precedent or an example, which is a big problem because Tucker Carlson's over here like, they're housing biological men in women's prisons, which it's like, okay, first of all, what does it mean to be a biological man? The state of Virginia defines it as having a penis. However, if you started taking estrogen before puberty and had blockers on your testosterone, even if you still have a penis, your physiology would be a lot more similar to a cisgender woman. So in that case, would it make more sense to put you in a women's prison? But I'm not saying I have the answers. Tucker Carlson is not looking at any of the nuances of this situation and is basically just saying like, see, the crazy LGBT community has been trying to put men with the women all along, which is like not really what's been going on here. That is such an oversimplified version of the issue, and because this is the only piece of it that's getting mainstream attention, I'm worried that this is going to do more harm than good for the trans community, because so many trans women are already painted as predators, right? We see people like JK Rowling who have made these statements like, it's too easy for men to pretend to be women to go in the women's bathroom and assault women, and that's what allowing trans women in the bathroom is going to do, like stuff like that, the fear mongering, when in reality it's often been found that a lot of trans women are the ones most likely to be assaulted when they go into male spaces. So if you have someone who looks completely feminine going into a male space, they're likely to be assaulted, and that becomes a huge problem as well. One other point that I've heard people make about this has been, okay, but Chris, in this case, along with, there have been other cases where this has happened, Chris has assaulted a woman. When we go over the history, it can be argued that her mother, Barb, is not the only woman that has been assaulted by Chris, but people have said, okay, well, Chris has assaulted a woman, and therefore Chris should not be going to a woman's prison because she's assaulted women, whether or not Chris is trans. And that the thing though there is that doesn't hold up, because it's like cis women who assault other cis women would still go to women's prison. Cisgender men who assault other cisgender men would still go to men's prison. The point is that like the gender of the person you assault does not determine which prison you go to. Again, it's a complex issue that I don't claim to have the one true correct answer for, but I don't think an oversimplified discussion on national news while the complex discussion is being had in the alternative spaces of the internet where people aren't going to see it on the whole and national discourse is going to be driven by things like this. I don't think that that's the answer. I think that let's have a discussion on this video and make this an open discourse. Now that we know what's going on right now with this situation, let's just give a brief overview of the whole Chris Chan situation if you're someone who is new to this. Back in 1982, Chris Chan was first born to two parents on the older side, Bob and Barb Chandler, who were in their 40s and 50s at the time that Chris was born. Both of them had other children from previous marriages who were estranged from them due to the fact that both of them were seen to have been fairly toxic people to be around. Chris's father, Bob, was known for having been racist, for having had homophobic beliefs and things like that, while Chris's mother was an extreme hoarder who hoarded garbage and tons of items throughout the family's home, making the home borderline unlivable. So Chris was born to less than ideal circumstances from the beginning. At a young age, Chris was first diagnosed with autism, but Chris's parents did not seek any services for Chris to learn how to adapt to a neurotypical world. And I can definitely say that I think to an extent there needs to be a give and take, right? Like I think the neurotypical world also has to make allowances for autism. However, Chris's parents did like nothing, not even the bare minimum. They put Chris into all the regular classes, even though Chris had shown like signs of having emotional difficulties or having, difficulties making friends. They never tried to seek out any therapy for Chris or anything like that. So Chris had been struggling with social interaction and friendships from the beginning. In high school, Chris's friends were primarily female. However, Chris started to go a little bit down the incel path when Chris's females friends turned Chris down for dates, claiming that they all had boyfriends, and this is what started Chris's love quest to find a boyfriend-free girl. When Chris first went to college, that's when the preying on women type of tendencies first started. Chris's parents did absolutely nothing to try to guide Chris in the right direction or get Chris therapy. So when Chris went to college, on her college campus, she would hold up an attraction sign that was like, I'm looking for a sweetheart. I'm looking for a girl between the ages of 18 to 21. Chris had an extensive list of requirements for this potential girlfriend, including that the girlfriend had to be white and not autistic, and that the girlfriend had to be conventionally attractive according to Chris's standards. Chris had absolutely no success with this sign, as I think most people could probably determine. Chris was banned from doing this on the college campus by the college's dean of students, Mary Lee Walsh. Shortly before Chris started producing content on the internet, Chris made a friend named Megan, and Chris soon fell in love with Megan, and Megan did not return the sentiment. Chris would often touch Megan without her consent, and one of their biggest falling outs happened when Chris tried to win a contest where the prize was tickets to Seattle, because Chris had planned to take Megan on that trip and try to get them into a romantic relationship. And when Megan found out about that, she was incredibly creeped out and was like, I've turned you down. I do not want to be in a hotel room on a vacation with you. What are you doing? And Megan cut all contact with Chris at that point. However, Chris continued to do some awful things to Megan, which we're going to talk about in a second. However, it was around this time that Chris also started producing content on the internet. This was around the mid-2000s, around 2007 or so. Right before Chris graduated high school, Chris had created this character named Sonichu, which is what Chris originally got known for. So when Chris was in high school, one of Chris's teachers was like, you have to do this assignment, and Chris wanted to use the character Sonic the Hedgehog in the assignment, or the character Pikachu, and the teacher was like, those are copyrighted characters, you have to create something of your own. So Chris decided to combine the characters and make the characters into Sonichu, the electric hedgehog Pokemon, which Chris then went on to make a comic series about. So Chris became very invested in this world of Sonichu comics and began posting them online in about 2007, when the comics were found by people on 4chan and posted on Encyclopedia Dramatica, and these comics, people started to kind of enjoy them ironically, kind of made fun of how poorly drawn they were, and this is where the bullying and abuse of Chris online first began. And I think this era of the internet is really important to talk about, because not a lot of people talk about what the early to mid 2000s internet was like. And the ways that the millennial generation, I think, was affected by the internet is vastly different than the way that Generation Z is affected by the internet, just from my personal experience. What I've seen in the past few years has been a more sanitized version of the internet, and I'm not here to make a value judgment on that to say if that's good or bad. I've just seen the internet being very sanitized in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. We've even had conversations recently about big tech and censorship and things like that. Those were not really conversations that were happening on the internet 15 to 20 years ago. Instead, the internet was kind of the Wild West. Anything went. The internet was a dark place of edgelord humor. The internet was basically a walking Spencer's gift store. The place was wild, right? I even remember I used to be somewhat of an internet troll back in my day. When I say back in my day, I'm talking about when I was in like elementary school. For some reason, I had a weird fascination with internet trolling, as I think a lot of people, I'm 28, so I think a lot of people my age did. Now, I didn't do the type of trolling that we're going to talk about here, which involved abusing people. If we want a funny story, I'll tell you some of the kind of trolling I did. My trolling when I was a kid, like 9 years old or so, often involved me going onto the American Girl doll website, onto their like help section where people would post questions like wanting advice. You know, Dear American Girl magazine, I need help because I'm always really jealous of my best friend. She has everything and I have nothing and I'm so jealous of her. And I would post to be like, the solution is that you should stick her in the trash can and then brag about how you're not in the trash can. So now you'll be superior. Like, I would just say the dumbest shit like that and they would never post it. I don't know if that's funny, but like, that's what the internet was like. The weirdest shit I did back in the day, if we want to like talk about me being a fucking weirdo, when I was in like 4th grade, I would love going onto parenting message boards and pretending to be a parent and posting the weirdest problems that my kids were having. Like, one of my favorite things to do would be to post like, Dear parenting message board, please help me. My son loves to poop out the window. He just sticks his butt out the window every day and just shoots poop across the yard because he wants to see how far he can get it to go. He one day wants to be a gold medalist in Olympic poop shooting. Like, I would say weird things. I was 9 years old. I would say weird things like that. And then I would get responses from other people being like, take your kids to therapy. It was a weird time. So that's the kind of shit I used to do on the internet. The internet was fucking weird before the days of, you know, more set social media sites. Even like as the MySpace days were first starting, before we got into like the Facebook days and the Twitter and Instagram days. The internet is much more segmented now. Things used to be just a hot mess of websites and forums where anything and everything went. So that's the type of culture we were existing in at the time. And I think a lot of people who look at people on the internet now and say, oh, this person was problematic on the internet, or this person did bad things on the internet back in the day. No, those things should never be excused. But at the same time, I think that there's a larger cultural discussion missing about what that world was really like at that time. The story of Chris Chan is really just kind of a perfect microcosm of what this world was like and what the effects were. So when Chris first posted these Sonichu comics online and people were making fun of them and making fun of how poorly drawn they were, Chris did not pick up on the one rule of the internet, which, to be fair, I don't pick up on this rule a lot and I fall into this trap a lot too, which is don't feed the trolls. Chris was someone who wanted to constantly feed the trolls and constantly get that attention online. Chris at this time was believing that Sonichu had a large fan base in addition to a large base of haters. And I've had people mention to me Chris never wanted to be a public figure, which is absolutely not true. Chris really did want to become famous from these Sonichu comics. Chris had dreams of Sonichu getting picked up by Nintendo. Chris wanted to work for these companies. Chris had every intention of getting a large fan base for Sonichu. Now, whether Chris's goals were realistic or not, that's another conversation. But this was what Chris wanted, but Chris ended up getting attention that she did not want because of the ways that people received these comics and the ways that people in this era love to latch onto cyberbullying. Soon, the abuse of Chris started to happen online. Because it was well known that Chris had been banned from college for holding this attraction sign, and around the same time, Chris had started going to the local mall and holding up this sign saying, looking for a boyfriend-free girl between 18 to 21, must be white, must be non-autistic, things like that. Because Chris was doing that and trying to attract women in public constantly and had recently gotten banned from the mall, a lot of the trolls online had found out about this and started pretending to be potential girlfriends for Chris. A lot of people would catfish Chris. Sometimes these trolls were female, but sometimes they were men who were pretending to be women to get Chris to say weird things on audio calls and then record those calls without Chris's consent and post them online. At one point, it became clear how homophobic Chris was and how much Chris really hated the LGBT community, which again potentially could have come from Chris's parents' very outdated beliefs on the LGBT community. Chris was very against gay people and same-sex relationships. Chris always did seem to think that lesbians were all right, and in a lot of cases it seemed to stem from there being a fetish for lesbians. However, Chris was always like, no, it's one man, one woman, that's how everything should be. So as a way to troll Chris, a lot of the trolls would say, well, Chris, you're gay. And, you know, back then people used gay as an insult, which is shitty and stupid, but that's what people did. So they would pretend to bully Chris for being gay because they knew that Chris was really homophobic and hated the idea of same-sex relationships. And as a way to prove to these trolls that Chris was not gay, Chris posted some erotic art that she had made of herself having sex with her friend Megan. And remember, Chris was still presenting and identifying male at this point, so the fan art would have been a man and a woman in that case. If you remember from a few minutes ago, Megan had rejected Chris, Megan was creeped out by Chris, and Chris had drawn this incredibly graphic picture showing the two of them having sex, fully showing their entire nude bodies that Chris had drawn from her own fantasies. And a lot of people online were like, whoa, that's creepy. And that was yet another example of Chris kind of objectifying women and using women for her own personal gain. Now, one of the worst examples of the trolling online happened with a person named Blue Spike. So I'm gonna give a quick warning for this because this trolling turned into borderline SA? I'm not sure. Just be warned going into the story that this one was really creepy. So there was a person named Blue Spike who was a troll on the internet, and this person was pretending to be a girl named Julie who was pretending to be Chris's girlfriend. Around this time, Blue Spike and a group of trolls that Blue Spike was a part of all created this fake story where Blue Spike would play this character Julie in chat logs with Chris online and then would also play the part of Julie's brother Max, and Julie's brother Max would not want Chris and Julie to be together and would create these conflicts and things like that. So this whole thing was kind of orchestrated to get entertaining content out of seeing Chris's reactions to these kind of things. It's very sadistic, very evil, but Blue Spike is known as one of the most sadistic trolls from this entire saga because of what this all culminated in. So for some context, when Chris created the Sonnet Shoe comics, Chris also created this necklace, this medallion of Sonnet Shoe as a character made out of clay that Chris had sculpted to wear as a necklace, as a medallion. And Chris often wore this everywhere. It was part of Chris's everyday outfit, and the medallion was very important to Chris. There had been times in the past when trolls had convinced Chris, send me your medallion, I'll be your girlfriend if you send me the medallion, and then recorded videos of them smashing the medallion and being like, you got trolled, Chris, just like really mean and nasty stuff like that. So then Chris was wearing a new medallion that she had constructed after the first one got smashed, and on a call with Blue Spike pretending to be Julie on an audio call, Blue Spike tried to do some, I guess, intimate conversation with Chris where Blue Spike pretending to be Julie convinced Chris that they would have sex if Chris would break the medallion into pieces and literally put it up her butt. And while Chris did this, Blue Spike and his troll friends were on the phone call recording this entire thing, which was then posted online. Blue Spike was then revealed to have never been a woman at all, but to be a 13-year-old boy, making this a very creepy thing that a grown adult with autism was catfished by a 13-year-old boy pretending to want to date them and having solicited nudes from that person, but pretending to be an adult woman. Meanwhile, an adult group of trolls was there condoning this as well. The entire situation was one of the most disturbing things that I had ever, when I read about this situation and learned about it, it was sickening.
The absolute low point came when some trolls encouraged a 13-year-old boy to pose as a 19-year-old girl and to have phone sex with Chris Chan and record it. In other words, they groomed a child to deceive an autistic person into performing sex acts for their entertainment.
The trolls continued to kind of take things too far, because around this time a lot of people said, Chris, just get off the internet. Just stop feeding the trolls, get off the internet, and it'll be okay. However, a lot of the trolls made it less okay by deciding to actually meet up with Chris in person. There were cases of trolls that were actually female wanting to go on dates with Chris and then physically meeting up with Chris at the mall, recording their date, and then posting it on the internet. There were cases of people showing up to Chris's church and things like that and finding out personal information about where Chris was located. Creepy stalker behavior, absolutely unacceptable. As these things were happening about a decade ago, Chris came out as transgender, changed her name to Christine, and began presenting as female. Chris also was getting into regular trouble with the law around this time. Because Chris was so attached to the character Sonic the Hedgehog because of the Sonichu comics and things like that, Chris would get very defensive of how Sonic was supposed to be and how that world had to be and things like that. So when one of the new Sonic series came out and Sonic's arms were changed from their original peach color and changed to blue to match the rest of Sonic's body, Chris got very upset about this, leading Chris to go to the GameStop and spray mace in the face of a GameStop employee as Chris was trying to alter the new Sonic games to color Sonic's arms blue. So Chris got in legal trouble for using violent force against an employee because of how mad she was that Sonic was the wrong color and things like that. Chris had also repeatedly been banned from a local game store called The Game Place, run by a man named Michael Snyder. Chris, along with Mary Lee Walsh, the dean of students from college, Chris considered Michael Snyder to be one of her enemies who was conspiring against her to make her life miserable. And at one point, Chris intentionally tried to run Michael Snyder over with her car after she was not allowed back into the Game Place store, leading Chris to actually have to go to court and experience some fines for that. So Chris does have a record of having trouble with the law and engaging in violent behavior, all of which was enabled by Chris's mother. Chris's mother actually tried to help Chris run over Michael Snyder with the car. So Chris's mother had been enabling this behavior from the beginning. Around this time, Chris's father, Bob, died, and after Bob died, Chris's house caught on fire due to the fact that, as I mentioned before, Barb had been a massive hoarder. So because the house was so crowded and there was hoarding everywhere, there was an issue with the coffee maker getting turned on and the house caught on fire. I believe one of the family's cats died in the fire, and Chris and Barb temporarily had to relocate to a new home. At that point, Chris started begging online for money regularly. I believe Chris and Barb both received money from the state, Chris for disability, but there was significant documentation that every time someone did donate money to Chris through PayPal or through GoFundMe or anything, Chris would never give it to Barb or never use it to pay the family's bills, but would instead go out and buy more Legos or buy more toys and things to hoard the new home with, clearly showing a sign of having inherited kind of her mother's hoarding tendencies, maybe from growing up and finding that environment normalized. Around the time that Chris was begging online for money, this was when Chris's mom first started showing a lot of signs of maybe potentially dementia or some signs of just not being completely present in the way that she had been before. Chris convinced her mom to get on camera and talk about these things. Around this time, Chris was also regularly posting on Facebook statuses that indicated that she had sexual fantasies about having sex with her mother, that she enjoyed reading fan fiction that included family members engaging with one another, and that Chris had dreams about engaging in that way with her own mother a lot of the time. And this was years ago, and Chris would post about this online and people would say, Chris, that's not good, you shouldn't post about that, that kind of thing. Now we're almost up to recent history, but a couple years ago, as of right now, Chris encountered one of the worst groups of trolls, and that was a team of guys named the Idea Guys. And what these guys did was basically psychological torture. They made Chris doubt her sense of reality. They basically convinced Chris had already kind of retreated into the Sonichu world that she'd created and kind of liked to act as if she were living in her fictional world. It seems to be maybe as a coping mechanism. So Chris acted like she was living in that world a lot, spent a lot of time in her fictional world with her comics and her video games. This particular group of trolls convinced Chris that that world was actually real, and that when Chris retreated to that world, it wasn't Chris's imagination, but that there was a merge that was going to happen called the dimensional merge, that these Chris's characters and all other fictional characters and all other cartoons and everything all really did exist just in a separate dimension, and that the merge would one day be coming where the entire world would be real humans and cartoons all living together. So it got to the point of being like, Chris's sense of reality became completely distorted. What's sad is Chris did have some people in her life that did try to get her help and did try to convince her to get off the internet, try getting a job. Chris did have a college degree. Chris ended up often just cutting these people out of her life and refusing to get the help that she needed. So it was somewhat self-destructive. So while Chris has been living in this delusion for a while, on July 31st, 2021, an audio call was leaked where Chris was speaking with a woman on the phone, where Chris described in detail the process of her engaging in intimate relations with her 80-year-old mother who allegedly has dementia. Chris seemed weirdly proud of having done this, described it in graphic detail. The audio's out there if you want to go verify this. I'm not going to play it because it's highly disturbing. But what happened next somehow takes this rabbit hole even deeper. So after the audio was leaked, people found that the woman whose voice was on the audio call with Chris was a 19-year-old Texas Tech student named Bella. At first, a lot of people considered Bella to be a hero because she had discovered that this elder abuse was going on. Chris soon got arrested for incest and I think elder abuse, and is now awaiting trial in jail. And a lot of people were grateful to this girl Bella for getting Chris to admit this on the phone so that the abuse of Chris's mom Barbara could be put to an end. However, shortly after that, it was found that Bella had actually recorded this call a week before the audio came out, and Bella actually was not planning to release the audio. As it turns out, Bella was yet another one of the trolls, potentially maybe one of the most abusive of the trolls yet. Bella has been found to have been a very sadistic person. Now I'm going to give another warning because in this section of the video, we are going to be talking about severe animal abuse, among other things. The information that has come out about Bella, and again, this is all alleged, the information that has come out about Bella has shown that Bella has, among other things, a history of animal abuse. A lot of people online have said that she shows a lot of the traditional stereotypical serial killer signs. She abuses animals. She's responsible for the death of her dog through neglect. Every trigger warning possible for this section. Click off if you're not ready for like all the worst possible things in the world. She also would boil her pet hamsters alive and eat them because she enjoyed animal abuse. She really seemed to enjoy just abusing other people. Allegedly, she had bullied trans students at her university to the point of suicide. Bella is just an evil, evil person. So when she recorded this audio of Chris admitting to having sex with her mother, she sat on this audio for a week. She was not even the one to release it. What was actually going on behind the scenes, Bella had a friend named Fiona. And Fiona was a young autistic woman who was actually interested in potentially dating Chris for real. So it seems like Chris could have been on a good path to potentially finding a legitimate relationship. Chris and Fiona were planning to have sex at an upcoming My Little Pony convention. So Bella was planning to go there and record the sex and use it as a form of blackmail. Bella's whole goal here, from what she has said that has been leaked from screenshots of Discord chats, is that she wanted to see if she could drive Chris to the point of suicide because she wanted to go down in history as the greatest troll of all time. And considering Chris Chan is considered the most documented person in history online, to cause that person's death, in her mind, that would make her the most well-known troll or the greatest troll ever. So Bella is probably one of the most sadistic people in the world if all of this is true. So Bella had been planning to record that sex, and along with that record the audio of Chris admitting to having sex with her mother, and use those pieces of recordings as blackmail, hoping that the blackmail would drive Chris to suicide. However, Bella's friend Fiona, the one who was legitimately interested in Chris, heard about this audio and decided to be the one to actually leak it. So that's how the audio ended up being leaked, and now all of this information about Bella is coming out. Through this research of Bella and what's been happening with her, it's found that her dad is actually a Navy SEAL, and a lot of people are concerned that because of him and her stepmom's ties to the government and to government agencies and things like that, that Bella might end up getting, like, not getting any punishment for this. Just this doesn't sound real. Like, I feel like if I wrote this as a novel and tried to sell it to my publisher, I would get this turned down for, like, there's no suspension of disbelief here. This story is just so wild, and it doesn't stop getting weirder. Bella's father is the author of multiple shitty self-help books. So if we want something to lighten the mood for a second, let me know in the comments if you want me to review his shitty self-help books on my channel. As you guys know, this channel, I review a lot of shitty self-help books, so if that's something you're interested in, let me know and I'll be on that. So this story is still unfolding. Chris's first court date, I believe, is set for September 16th. So we are just gonna kind of have to wait and see what happens next, what we see next month. But I just think that the way this story is being portrayed by a lot of people is one of two ways, and it's a problem. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, the internet is desperate to have heroes and villains. It's desperate to have vigilantes and problematic, toxic people that we take down. In this story is just so convoluted and fucked up that there is no way we can have that. Who is the villain and who is the victim in this case? Well, when it comes to the actual SA crime itself that has been being talked about, very clearly Chris is the villain, and Chris's mom in this case is a victim of assault, and that case is pretty clear cut. However, when we look beyond that, there are a lot of signs that Chris was a victim of abuse from her mom in her childhood as well, when her mom would have a weirdly close relationship with her and would encourage her to be reliant on her and things like that, and would enable her behavior. Chris is a victim of a system that does not have readily available mental health services for people who need them, and Chris is also a victim of one of the worst online cyberbullying campaigns that went on for decades on end. Chris is absolutely a victim in so many ways, but then when you try to paint the situation as Chris is a victim, Chris is a trans autistic woman who has been bullied online for years and is the victim in the circumstance, that also completely ignores the fact that Chris has been preying on women since college, that Chris has a long documented history of touching women without their consent, of not listening to women when they say no, of drawing sexually explicit images of women who don't want it and posting it online. There's a long and documented history of that even before the trolling started, even before Chris was online. So people who try to simplify this issue to, this is an issue about trans issues, or this is an issue about autism, or this is an issue about this one thing. It's not an issue about one thing. This story is so convoluted that there's no way to have a discussion about this if you're going to only focus on one facet of it. And the hard part is we have to become comfortable with the idea that a horrible person can be a victim can be a horrible person, and that there are some cases where just everyone is truly awful. I wanted to read a few of the comments that I got on my community tab when I first announced that I was going to be making this video, because I had a pretty mixed response. Some people seemed happy that I was making this video, other people seemed a little bit skeptical or a little concerned. So let's take a look. So here are some of the comments that I received on my community tab that I want to read and respond to, because I think a lot of these are really nicely worded and a lot of them are important, and other ones I completely disagree with and want to talk about as well. I'm going to be hiding everyone's identity on this too, because people in my comments are not public figures. I assume you already will discuss some of these, but I think it's vital to cover the following to give the analysis proper balance. Number Number 1, there are 0 winners in this story and we need to learn from this. Number 2, poor mental health advocacy and knowledge may have at least been in part to blame. Remember, Chris Chan was diagnosed with autism as a child just a couple decades or so ago. These mental health programs were not understood, and arguably they still aren't. I think that one's incredibly important because the idea of understanding mental health and even the topic of neurodivergence, like when I type neurodivergence on Google Docs, it still puts a red squiggly line under it. That's how new this word is, that a lot of people don't even know it yet. The idea that like there's different ways that people's brains function that determine the way that they perceive the world and the way that they go through life. That seems still be somewhat of a new development, that we're even taking mental health concerns seriously. The fact that Chris was born in 1982 and is now almost 40 years old, Chris was born before a lot of these things were widely talked about and discussed, and in a lot of cases these issues were just swept under the rug and people like to pretend that they didn't exist. Nowadays we're seeing more advocacy for mental health awareness and things like that, but we still have a long way to go. We still have to remove a lot of the stigma from going to therapy. We still have to understand that, you know, having autism is a spectrum, and I've heard a lot of people who have autism say if you know someone with autism, that means you know one person with autism, because autism can manifest so differently and behave so much differently in different people in the way that it affects the way people think and the way people perceive the world around them. So there just definitely needs to be a lot more understanding of how these things work and what accommodations need to be made for students and for kids when they're first diagnosed with something like autism or ADHD or OCD or even anxiety or depression or something. When someone from a young age is diagnosed with something mental health related, it's important to be able to determine what accommodations might they need. If there's a learning disability involved, what can we do to make sure that this kid is going to thrive in school and is going to be able to be set up for success? Because a major problem is that Chris was not set up for success from the beginning. Number 3, online hate mobs and criminal levels of trolling definitely contributed to the problems. I completely agree. And that's why I think that when we look at the internet now, the internet is already a lot more sanitized than it used to be. However, it's not... That doesn't mean that things on the internet are necessarily completely better. Because, you know, as we've talked about in the past, if you have a problem, you don't cut off the supply, you cut off the demand. So when you censor people online, a lot of the mainstream social media things like Facebook and Twitter and things like that are not going to have this level of abuse on them, but that leads to some of the boards on 4chan, or it leads to sites like Kiwi Farms where a lot of this information came from, and websites like that allowing a lot of the behavior like this to happen. But at the same time, sites like 4chan and Kiwi Farms were the reasons that Bella was found and a lot of Bella's crimes were brought to light in the first place, and people realized that Bella was the one that allowed this abuse to continue by sitting on that audio for a week. So it's one of those situations where it's like, what do we want to do to make sure that the internet is a place where we can all coexist peacefully? Is it possible? I don't know. But when we see a targeted hate mob like this against someone online, when we see someone being bullied to this extent, what is the answer? What do we need to do? What are the solutions to this? And I don't know the specific answers, but I think this is a big thing that needs discussion because the internet is here to stay. It is a big part of a lot of our lives, and it's becoming only more prevalent as time goes on. And then number 4 was recommending ContraPoints' video. Shout out to ContraPoints. She is literally a queen. Like, she's my idol on the internet. And then it says number 5, we must take true scum, transmedicalist, and conservative viewpoints on the situation with a spoonful of salt. In particular, people like Vanessa LeBlanc, Too Cute Smasher 9000, and of course Tucker Carlson. They have been far less benevolent motivations for covering this subject. Okay, so I know that Vanessa LeBlanc is Blair White, just based on, that's like ContraPoints' nickname for her. And yeah, I did watch Blair White's video on this topic. My feelings on Blair White have always been mixed. I find her to be kind of a bully. I think she's pretty mean, and I think her videos are poorly researched. But at the same time, I get mad at specifically when certain like cisgender people will say like Blair White is bad trans community representation. I don't think it's up to cisgender people to determine if a trans person is good enough representation, nor, as I've said before, do I think it is at all reasonable to expect a person to ever bear the burden of being the representation for their entire community. So I'm not really a fan of Blair White. I did watch her video on Chris Chan, and she focused way too much on just the surface, on like Chris is trans and Chris did an essay to her elderly mother and therefore is Chris a real trans person. Like, it was just focused on that, when in reality there's a lot more at play here. So this is the next comment that I got that I wanted to discuss. By the way, shout out to my comment section for writing such thoughtful comments. This person says, in regards to the trans angle, any kind of complaints on Chris's trans identity, if Chris identifies with she, her pronouns, we use she, her pronouns. She can make that choice for herself. And that's exactly the reason that I was saying we should call Chris she, because whether or not you believe Chris is really trans, or whether or not you think that Chris is a worthy person deserving of respect, is irrelevant. We want to set the precedent that nobody can determine someone's life better than that person can. We don't want to set the precedent that someone else has a say on that, no matter the circumstance. That's my point on that. And then this person added, that being said, there is crossover between non-traditional gender expression and neurodiversity. This was exploited in the earlier days of YouTube and Tumblr as a point and laugh type of scenario. In reality, many neurodivergent individuals do not experience their gender the way neurotypical people do, just as they don't experience the world as neurotypical people do. If we neurodivergent people don't conform to normal social practices and understandings, it makes sense we would view the concept of gender as well as sexual identity in a very different way than the majority of the population. The person who commented this says, I am a neurodivergent woman with ADHD and autism, and I identify as a cisgender woman mostly because it's less complicated than explaining all of this, plus I enjoy presenting feminine. And I understand that. I am a neurodivergent as well. I have OCD, and I've considered getting evaluated for autism in the past, because autism and OCD have a lot of crossover symptoms. But I understand that, like, I've had a lot of trouble understanding gender norms and gender roles and conventions, and as a result, I've taken on a lot of, like, masculine qualities in my life that, you know, people have sometimes made fun of and things like that, because to me, I'm like, well, I don't see the reason to be presenting in a specific gender conforming way. I don't see the purpose of it. So I get that. This person's comment I really like. They said, I listened to a podcast, Behind the Bastards, which shout out to that podcast because I've had it recommended to me by so many people and it sounds amazing. This person said, the thing I love most about it is that they don't shy away from the human that is the bastard. It's not about ignoring things or brushing off actual issues. It's about people remembering that if a human did a thing, more humans are capable of doing the same thing. We need to be aware of the why in the hopes to prevent future bastards or something like that. If all of the villains are monsters, then there's a possibly damaging distance the rest of us experience. Oh, I could never be that bad, and now I know I could be, so we're all safe no matter what happens because we're not monsters. That idea. And I completely agree with this, and I think this is a reason why I've gotten a comment a lot where people say you give a lot of people the benefit of the doubt, or even sometimes you go too easy on people. But I think that is important to remember, is that if we look at these situations as the world has good people and bad people, and I am one of the good people and I can never be one of the bad people, it keeps us unable to self-reflect and to be able to determine when we might be veering into that territory of not expressing empathy. None of us are going to be completely empathetic and good human beings 100% of the time. We all act in self-interest at various points. And I think we have to recognize that to be able to determine when acting in self-interest goes too far. Someone said, I would like to hear your opinions on what could have been done to prevent this. I don't think any of this behavior can be explained away or excused, but I would love to get your thoughts on the contributing factors. For example, the types of language that could be avoided when speaking anonymously online. Trolls don't care, I get that, but sometimes we can unintentionally alienate someone or continue dogpiling and making a situation worse without realizing it. Another example would be to talk about how the situation could have been avoided in regards to Chris being the caregiver for her mother, despite Chris probably needing or at least could benefit from the caregiving help herself. This is not to say that all autistic people should be monitored and not be able to have any responsibilities. There are many autistic individuals raising children, working in caregiving positions, etc., but it's worthy to note the failures of the systems that led Chris to being the sole caregiver for her dementia-burdened mother. And I completely agree with this. I think that in a lot of cases, the systems in place were not good to Chris. Chris, as I mentioned, did not receive any type of academic accommodations in school, did not receive any therapy. And while, we know that Chris is diagnosed with autism, we don't know if Chris has any other mental health things going on. A lot of people speculate that she probably does, considering how much she currently believes that this dimensional merge is going to happen and how the fictional world and the real world are going to come together. I think that mental health services are a huge thing that need more, just more. They just need to be better. I have benefited a lot from therapy. I've benefited a lot from seeing a psychiatrist and from taking medication for my OCD. I think that we almost need to create this culture where we see going to a therapist once a year the same way we see going to a primary care practitioner once a year for a yearly physical. Why not have a yearly mental health checkup and see if you might need to be referred to a psychiatrist, and if not, just, talk it out with your therapist and make sure everything seems to be good to go. That, and I think people need to have better education about the balance of online life and face-to-face life, which has gotten even increasingly more difficult in the pandemic. But a lot of times when I was, doing background research for this video and I was watching the long documentary that Gino Samuel put together, there were so many times when I was like, Chris should just log off. Chris needs to just get off of the computer. But the problem was that Chris didn't have a lot of real life friends in person, and part of that did come from the fact that Chris's parents did nothing to help her accommodate to the world that was going on around her or to her environment. Chris's parents enabled a lot of her behavior when she would try to prey on women in public and things like that. Chris never really suffered a lot of consequences from her parents or from a lot of authority figures. So I think there also needs to be something here with, I've gotten comments both saying that, like, we need to go easier on Chris because she has autism, and then I've also seen people saying, no, that's ableist to say that you need to go easier on someone because they have autism, because autistic people are still humans who are capable of making their own decisions, and to deny that humanity is disgusting. And I agree with that as well. I think that Chris needed to face more consequences for her actions, and that by people trying to act like autism could be a get out of jail free card was actually making the situation a lot worse. This person says here, I disagree entirely with the witch prison conversation, in regards to a lot of the mainstream media focusing on, is Chris going to men's prison or women's prison? This person says, I genuinely believe she'd be killed in there regardless. She needs to be in a mental facility, and I don't know why that's not mentioned other than Reddit. It's infuriating and trivializes other parts of this that need to be public. And I think that's important too. I've been reading a lot of discussions about this on Reddit, and a lot of people have been talking about how that if you do plead insanity, the mental institution that you'll end up going to often has conditions that are just as bad, if not worse, than prison. So that's another major systemic piece of this issue, is that there do need to be more rehabilitative places for people to go whose crimes could seem to have stemmed from mental health problems. And I just want to make it very clear, having a mental health issue of any kind does not excuse a crime. It especially does not excuse a violent crime against another person. I think you can talk about how mental health issues can explain where something might have come from without excusing them. So I don't think Chris's autism or whatever other mental health conditions Chris might be dealing with are excuses for her behavior, but I do think that looking at the circumstances in Chris's life and the difficulty that Chris had assimilating with other people, I think that definitely could explain where some of this behavior first stemmed from, and maybe Chris does need to go to some kind of assisted living facility or things like that. Again, I don't have the exact answer, but I think that the conversation needs to be so much bigger than men's prison or women's prison, because a lot of people are treating this case as something that's setting a precedent. I think it's terrible that any case would be the one to set a precedent for other cases, because every case is going to be so different. But I also think that this is really important to discuss, well, when do we want to put someone in a rehabilitative facility instead of a prison? When do we want to put someone in maybe an assisted living home? Is Chris's mom maybe going to go to an assisted living home because she may have dementia or something like that? I don't know. There's so much more at play here, and again, this is going to lead into a whole discussion of prison reform and how a lot of prisons are often used more for what people's weird idea of revenge rather than they're used for actual rehabilitation of people who could one day be productive members of society. Will Chris Chan ever be a productive member of society? I don't know. So there were a couple arguments in my comment section about pronouns, which I will address really quick. So one person said, I don't see Chris as a trans woman. To use she pronouns is giving him respect he does not deserve. He's a monster, and I read he will not be going to a women's prison. He will be going to men's prison. Hence, for you to use she pronouns is inaccurate and insulting to both trans people and biological women. The state of Virginia does not recognize him to be a trans woman, but if you care more about keeping your channel politically being correct, then that is your choice. This is not about political correctness. I actually really don't care about political correctness on this channel. I care more about pursuit of truth on this channel. That's why I have, discussed some controversial ideas and talked with some controversial people before. I don't think that whether you use someone's gender pronouns is a sign of respect or disrespect. It's just a sign of accuracy. If we are to say that Chris is a trans woman and that is accurate, to say that is accurate is to say that we recognize that nobody knows someone's personal life better than that person. I'm not a mind reader. If Chris is faking being trans, I have no fucking idea. I don't think anyone has any idea about that. Chris is the only person who truly knows, and I think it's more helpful. It's not a sign of respect. You can disrespect and criticize someone while still calling them the right gender. So this comment here said, when addressing the trans issue in prison, perhaps bring up that trans people tend to be abused at a higher rate than others. A lot of people are talking about protecting women, completely ignoring the harm done to trans women in male prisons, which I think is true too. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there should be no violence against anyone in prison because violence against other people is just bad in general. Even if someone has been imprisoned for violence, in an ideal world, we would want prison to focus on rehabilitation, not on watching people who are bad get what's coming to them. But this person replied and said, he does not deserve pity. Women are being harmed by trans women in prison. Yes, we have to protect women. Not all trans women are like Kim Petras, who basically are just a chromosome away from being a woman. Other trans women are late transitions who still have male characteristics. Hormones do indeed affect thought. If I had to choose between protecting women or trans women, I sure as hell choose to protect women. You are the delusional one here. I'm pretty sure you do not give a shit about Chris's poor mother. That's what we should be talking about and defending. Okay, so this is just a straw man argument because, as I've said, I do think that Chris has been a monster in the way that she has assaulted her mother. You can say she and also say that Chris assaulted her mother and talk about Chris as the villain in this scenario. And when this person says protecting women or trans women, there's an umbrella, which is women, right? And trans women and cis women are both under that umbrella. So women and trans women are not two separate categories, so that doesn't make sense. That would be like lesbians and straight women are both under the women category too, even though they have different experiences. The whole hormones affect thought, I'm gonna need to see a citation on that. This person replied and said, I think I missed the part where I said Chris deserves pity. I am mostly speaking about how the situation is being talked about in the mainstream and it's being framed as should evil, scary trans women be in women's prisons. And I agree. I think that it's really bad that Chris is being used as the example, or that any person should ever be the example for their group, because that's how bad negative stereotypes get perpetuated against groups that are already struggling to have rights. Do I think that Chris is a good example of a trans woman? I don't think that's for anyone to determine. I think every trans person needs to be treated as an individual. And so that's the problem here. There are going to be good trans people and bad trans people, just like there are good men and good women in this world, and there are evil men and evil women. There are good and evil of every demographic. So to act like being trans has any effect on that is really beside the point. So this person then starts going on about how trans women and biological women are not the same. Nobody ever said trans women and cis women are the same. They have different life experiences. Some of them are very biologically similar because there are some trans women that have taken a certain amount of hormones and have gotten certain surgeries, and they're basically identical. Even some of them were born with XX chromosomes. That's rare, but it has happened. So there are times where they will have similar, almost identical life experiences, but in most cases, no, they are going to be different. But that doesn't mean that, like I said, lesbians and straight women are both women. Different life experiences, still women. Black women and white women oftentimes will have different life experiences, still both women. Women born in 1850 and women born in 2021 gonna have different life experiences, still both women. I don't understand why this is so hard to understand. So then a whole argument goes on here. I think focusing, again, I feel like I had to justify just the fact that I was saying she, but this is really just irrelevant from the rest of it. I think it's just good to make a practice of calling people what they want to be called, regardless. I want to know your guys' thoughts on everything in the comments below. I think the problem is that when a situation which in the past, Chris Chan's life was treated as some kind of lore or mythology that was passed around in alternative spaces on the internet, and now that this story is reaching mainstream news and being watered down to something that is completely outside of that is completely like a disgustingly oversimplified version, and that disgustingly oversimplified version of it has the potential to create further negative stereotypes about trans women or about autistic people. That's really awful, and I think we can keep in mind that, like, you can have a trans autistic person who is an evil person and a predator, but that does not mean that trans and autistic people are evil or predators. For example, the majority of serial killers are men, but that doesn't mean we should assume every man is a serial killer, right? It often seems that it's only marginalized groups that get these types of stereotypes because people want to be like, see, I knew that they were bad, even though it's just one person. One person of every type of group could be bad, if that makes sense. So again, the reason I felt that I wanted to speak about this issue is that I really hate how people at large might be viewing this issue without having the full backstory or without understanding the weird, multifaceted uniqueness of this situation. And if someone like Tucker Carlson wants to make this into a precedent for what trans women in women's prisons are going to be like, I don't know if Chris is even going to prison or if Chris is going to go to some assisted living facility or something. We're going to have to wait until the trial to find out. But regardless, to treat this situation as if it's a precedent for anything makes no sense, because this situation is so unique and weird and convoluted to the point that I almost still struggle to believe that this situation is real. And I think it's also important to keep in mind as we move forward to our lives becoming more and more online, the way that internet culture can affect the long-term mental health of someone or can affect someone's life. Sometimes on the internet, while as commentators or as people who are analyzing a situation, we want to analyze the internet in terms of good guys and bad guys. We want to say this person's good and this person's bad, this person deserves respect and humanity and this person doesn't. And in reality, the internet is never going to be that simple. If I get canceled online one day, maybe I was a bad guy in that situation and maybe someone else was too. I don't know. The point is, this is all more complex than we want to make it, and I think it really is time to have a conversation about how this is a lot bigger, not just for this situation, but for the internet and our interactions with one another as a whole. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I will see you guys again soon. In the meantime, keep on supporting small businesses. Bye weekend. Bye.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.